But welcome to FOP Day 4. As I was talking about right before I started this recording, we're about to start getting into some complex lessons, right? We're going to start introducing JavaScript. I'm not quite sure exactly where you guys started in your coding journey, which was either Python or JavaScript. I myself started with Python, but um, JavaScript itself, it's not going to be the same as what you've been learning, whether you've been doing the intro to coding or you've been learning on your own. We're going to be using JavaScript to actually manipulate our web page, working with the DOM, which we'll talk about later today, and seeing how JavaScript ties into our application to make our application work, right? So we can take it from a very static web page with no functionality to something that can actually do things like clicking a button, sending information, changing to a different page, stuff like that. Um, and that in itself is a little difficult for some new people to start off to understand the concept. So hopefully, we can do good here, and I can clear out any kind of confusion that might encounter. And then after JavaScript, we start including stuff like APIs, um, which are essentially like third-party databases that people have that provide us with information like data, right? And these APIs, there's a specific way of making requests to these APIs, and we'll talk about how to do that with JavaScript. And then after that, we're going to build into Python. And Python is going to be the biggest meat and potatoes of this course because we're going to focus a lot on object-oriented programming, which is the biggest hurdle of our courses, right? It seems to have the highest fail rate of most of our students, and students having to retake the assessment because it's so difficult, right? It's the first gate right off the bat. Um, and people come into the program thinking like, oh, I'll be doing Python for the last 6 months. I feel like I should be good. Most of these Python courses or JavaScript courses or any kind of coding course you learn or go through, they teach you the basic fundamentals, right? How to declare a variable, how to do for loops, how to do the different types of data structures like lists, dictionaries, how to write a function, right? But they don't show you how you actually apply these to a real application, right? How do you actually use it in object-oriented programming? How to make this work into an actual program itself? They teach you the syntax and the variables and like the basic stuff of it, but not how to actually apply it. And that's the hard part, right? Anybody can learn how to assign a variable in Python. Anybody can learn how to start a for loop, right? The when it comes to actually applying it can get very tricky. And um, the foundation of programming course, the way that it's structured, it's meant to kind of help you get ready for the immersive program because the way that we teach object-oriented programming is very similar to how you're going to be tested, right? It's not the exact test, and there's a lot of stuff that we leave out, but um, when you go through the course for object-oriented programming was um, it'll be very similar. So when you guys get to your cohort, you won't struggle as much. I didn't actually go through the foundation program course like I was telling you guys. I was watching along. Unfortunately, I didn't watch everything because life gets busy. You get out of work. You leave work around 5. By the time you pick up your children, your family, you eat dinner, right? And then there's a video to watch. That's a 3-hour video from FOP. Not everybody had that time, and I didn't have that time to watch every single video. And I missed out on the object-oriented programming day. Um, so I didn't go into the assessment with some kind of knowledge in object-oriented programming. I struggled on that assessment. It got to like Sunday morning, right? Typically, you have like the weekend, so it gets we administer these assessments on a Friday, and they're due by Monday morning. Um, it was Sunday morning, and you have to pass so many tests. You have to run your code against tests that are written for you, and your code has to pass these tests, right? A certain amount, about 70% of the tests need to pass. There's like 24 tests, if I remember correctly, and I was passing like 7, right? Not even half, and I was struggling. It was like Sunday morning. I'm like, I got like 24 hours. I hit up my TA that was assigned to my group. I'm like, yo, like I need some help. He took a look at my code and he's like, yeah, you might want to delete these things, right? So he kind of starts going through with me. telling me delete this, delete that. You don't need that. This is messed up. Yada yada. So I'm listening to him. We're doing this for about half an hour. Halfway through, he's like, I gotta drop. Something came up. He had to leave, and then he leaves me with a broken program. Right, where before I was passing 7 tests, I'm passing like 1 test now. And my program was complete busted. I didn't know what the heck I deleted, and now I restarted this assessment Sunday night. I coded all night long to make sure I got through the assessment, but it was tough. Like it was tough. Um, and partially because the Python lesson is like a week long, right? It's very quick, and that's the entire course itself because it's so much information. It's a fire hose information, and you're expected to be able to be very receptive to it. Um, and it would have helped if I would have seen this earlier. So when they're covering it a little bit more in depth, I would have been able to already understood the basics and maybe focus on the more advanced topic that they were teaching that wasn't taught on in FOP. So I really regret not being able to see that video because I struggled, right? Um, so continuing with this course is gonna pay you in the long run. I promise you, right? Where people are spending all night to code, you can focus 2 3 hours. Get what you need to get. It's not the first time you've seen this subject, so it'll click a lot faster, right? So I encourage you guys, make sure you guys are still showing up every day that you guys can. And if you can't, at least watch the videos because it's good information. But nice to see you, Kenny. We're gonna go ahead and start off today with a quick little recap of everything that we covered yesterday, and then we're gonna build off from that recap to ensure that we understood what we were talking about yesterday without having any kind of confusion. Because I know it was a little kind of all over the place, and I acknowledge that. So let's go ahead and kind of slow it down a little bit. We're gonna open up here a TL draw page, and I want to talk about everything that we were discussing yesterday. All right, about CSS. So the first thing I want to talk about is going to be the CSS syntax. So if you guys remember the syntax, what's the basic structure of the syntax? Right, there was a PowerPoint slide that I demonstrated that had the syntax broken down. Do you guys remember how it's supposed to be structured?
You're talking about the CSS file?
Not specifically, right? I'll start you off, right? The CSS syntax of how to actually create a style, right? It would be like you require a selector, right? And after you define your selector, what do we do?
Curly braces open
Yeah, we got the curly
and
braces,
close.
and what goes inside these curly braces?
What do they call it? The actual property and then a value.
There we go.
So
We got
it's
the
separated by a colon,
awesome. We got property, and then we have the property value, right?
and it's called the
Good.
declaration.
This is called declaration. Awesome. That's exactly what I want to hear. The terminology of how to actually describe this, right? We had the selector, the property, and the property value. And then we ended with a semicolon to identify that if we want to add another line, right? We could just go to the next one. If you don't add the semicolon, you're going to get an error. It won't know that you're trying to add another property afterwards, right? So if you do this and you do another property value, but you don't have the semicolon here, you're going to get an error. So just make sure you're aware of that. Well, awesome. Yeah, so this is syntax, the very basic syntax of how you would write some kind of a style for a specific element, right? Whether it's a p tag, an h1 tag, or something very specific like an ID or class, which we're going to build off on today. And now that we had the syntax written down, let's talk about the properties. What type of properties can we manipulate? And I don't expect all of them, right? I just want to just from the top of your head, what do you guys remember from yesterday? Some of the ones that we saw.
Like, oh, go ahead. Oh, like background and the color of background, border background.
Background color, right? We saw color, right, for the fonts. What else? I think
Font family.
font style. I think font family. I think you are correct. Font family. We saw font weight, which made it like italic or bold. All right, this is a good start. We saw
The text decoration.
Yeah.
declaration. Can you say that? Oh, text decoration.
The text decoration.
Yeah, absolutely. Text decoration. There we go. I'm glad you
then it was
remember
font
that.
weight. Oh, yeah, you already have that. Never mind. Sorry.
Yeah, we saw the text decoration very, very briefly with that one example, right? So I'm glad you guys remember that one. We got text decoration for like underline, or and if you saw the values that we could have set for this, There's also like a cross through. So there's different ways to decorate our text. We saw margin, all right, we saw padding, and maybe I didn't elaborate too much on these, but margin, when you just define just margin or just padding, this is going to take all sides, right? Top, bottom, left, and right. We can also specify margin left, margin right, margin top, and margin bottom. And the same thing with padding, right? Padding left, padding right, padding top, padding bottom. So you can specify very specifically where you want to add the type of style. Do you guys remember any other ones? I think we saw text align. If you guys remember that correctly, we aligned the text from left to right, and then we saw align items or align content. We'll mess around with these to see exactly how these two work to align them from top to bottom. And these were some very brief ones we saw. We also saw, I think, let me add it over here with border, with padding and margin. We saw border was one of them. Yeah, so we definitely saw a handful, right? And these are just a couple of all the different types of properties that you're able to manipulate. Now let's talk about property values, right? Or let's say value unit values. Yeah, unit value. This is a very important one, right? When setting a unit, for example, like the let's go with like margin, right? What kind of values did you guys see? I'll start you off. We saw something like pixel.
The EM, I think.
Yep,
EM,
EM.
text size.
EM, that took the size of the text, like by its default size, and then you could do a multiplier, right? So we can say 2M, so it'll be 200% of the original size, right? 5M would be 5 times the original size. If you did 0.5, it would be half the original size of the text. So yeah, EM was definitely one of them. Percentage was another one. We actually didn't show you this one directly, but this was one of them. I didn't give an example, but we definitely can do percent. What was the other one?
Like they had like centimeters too, I think.
Yeah, we had some centimeters. I think we had inches as well. We also had view height. We had view width. I think we had V min and V max. We didn't see these specifically. We could probably elaborate a little bit more on these once we start talking about divs more and how to CSS the divs. But these are some very common ones, right? Here are our unit values. There might be a handful more, but these are the most common ones that you will see. Good stuff.
I remember you specifically talking about view height and view width because that has to do with kind of responsiveness of the device that you're using, whether you're using a mobile device or a computer screen. It kind of adjusts based on the screen size.
Absolutely. Vmin and Vmax can do something very similar to that, can help you with responsiveness. Not to say that these don't help out. Pixel isn't very responsive. I would say that view height will probably be a little bit more responsive than defining a specific pixel, right? Because what if you have a big screen, but you have the pixel set to 50 pixels? It'll still be 50 pixels whether it's a small screen or a big screen, and so it's not the most responsive one, right? So, but yeah, that was a good thing to point out. Good stuff. So here we have our syntax. We have the properties. We have some unit values. Now let's talk about how we actually attach the CSS. What are the couple ways that you can assign or declare CSS for your file?
In the head, you can do a link for a style sheet.
Yep. The first one's going to be the link one. So we have the link. Let's see if you guys remember the other ones.
It was like inline too, right?
We have inline styling, and there's another one.
You can also refer to a font. No, that's the link.
We have a style one, right? If you guys remember, you can put a style tag in the header, and you can add all your CSS within that style tag. But I did mention this one wasn't the most efficient because it would just, you're pretty much creating a CSS document within the head tag, which is not the best. But these are the handful ways of doing it. Good stuff. All right, so let's name this linking / using CSS. All right, so we have how to link it.
Could you go through the link tag again? It's like link equals style sheet and then an href to the address.
Yes, I definitely can, right? So the link is going to take a couple of attributes. It's going to take two to be specific. It's going to take the rel, which I believe stands for relation. And then you will define what type of style, what type of sheet or document this is. This is a style sheet. So you put that in double quotes. And then the next one, which is specifically the most important one, which is the location of where this style sheet is at. And it's going to be done with the href attribute. And then you will put the file path of where it's at, right? And I'm just giving here a little demonstration of what it will look like. If this was in a folder called other files, we would have to specify that style directories /style.css, right? So you would have to add the file path of how to get there. Something
Can you go?
like that.
Can you, using that href tag, can you go up a directory from the directory you're in now, or do you have to only go down directories?
To go up a directory, you have to use a dot to let it know that you're going to go up once. All right,
Can
so
you go
dot.
up more than once?
I believe so. I think you got 2 dots, or you specify that it's going to be above your current directory where you're located at, and then start giving the file path from there. And I think it'll be smart enough to identify it, and we can experiment with this in a little bit. And the reason why I can't give you a straight answer here is because there's different ways of doing it in the HTML document. We do it differently for Django in a Python file. It's different for JavaScript, so I get this mixed up. So I don't know the exact one specifically for this one off the top of my head. But yes, there is a way to specify, above, and we can see that in real time in a bit once we start working with the CSS document. But that's a good point. Thank you for bringing it up, Tim.
In the link where it says like relation and then equals style sheet, so there's obviously like other style or other sheets. What are like some of the other sheets you would be using? Does that make sense?
That is a very good question. Let's check it out. Because I don't know off the top of my head. HTML link tag relation attribute. Let's see, should be somewhere here. So the one we used this was a style sheet, right? So imports a style sheet, but you see, there's a bunch of different ones.
Yeah.
And for different types of things, not specifically just a style sheet, but you're essentially specifying what this link tag is supposed to reference, right? So relationship between a linked resource and the current document. What is the relationship between the 2 documents that you're trying to connect? I have probably not used 95% of these. I'm not even gonna lie to you. You don't really encounter a lot of these. They're very specific to your project. Privacy policy gives a link to an information about the data collection usage practices that apply to the current document. Terms of service is another one that you can link to your HTML document. Once again, very specific to your project and what you're trying to work on or the assignment. I focus more on backend, so I've never really had to use any of these extra stuff, but style sheet is a very good specific example that we've been using. But as you see, there are multiple other examples here. But I've not used these. Permalink for the nearest ancestor section for bookmark. Or you could just give an altered representation of the current document. So there's different variations here of what you can use.
Off your memory, how about just linking a JavaScript file as opposed to a CSS file?
Yes, that's used a different tag, not a link tag, but it's gonna be a script tag. And we'll be talking about it today. No worries, Jason. Good stuff. All right. I think we're doing good here. So we talked about this. Let's talk about the specificity, which I know we haven't specificity. We haven't really elaborated on IDs and classes yet, which we'll do right after this example. But from the top of your head, what is the levels of specificity from highest to lowest?
Was it like inline the highest?
Yeah, inline styling has the highest level of specificity.
An
And
ID,
the next one was ID,
class,
class,
an element.
and element. Absolutely. Good stuff. You guys are very receptive. It's nice to see this. Good stuff. Yeah, so specificity, inline styling, ID, class, and element. And this is pretty much everything that we covered yesterday, summarized into one little picture here. And we're gonna go ahead and build off on this specificity here. Now let's go to the specificity. So we talked about IDs and we talked about classes, but what exactly are they, right? The way that I like to kind of think about it is almost like specifying or marking things with a label, right? So if you had a let's do this. Let me open up a HTML document here. HTML example.html. And let's do this. And this head tag, let's say I had a form, right? I had different forms in this page, right? One form is for signing up people, right? And the other form is going to be for, let's say, creating a survey. Let's say my application, and I'll add some context here. Let's see if I remember this correctly. I think it's, I'll just use this. I'll just use the hashtag right now. This website is a application that provides surveys to receive feedback from customers, right? But before someone can use this application, I need them to sign up for my website. And then there's going to be a different page that they're going to have to use to fill in the survey for feedback, right? So I'm going to require two different forms, probably in two different pages, but we're just doing this on the same page so we can kind of see how these will work. But I have two different forms on my website, right? And for some reason, I want to have a specific styling for this form and a specific styling for this. Well, it would make it very difficult to style this, and let's add a new new file in here, CSS example.css. If in my CSS file I try to do form, this is going to format all the different form tags in my website, which I don't want, right? These should have their own individual styling. This is just how I want to set it up. I want these to be very unique. So how can I ensure that this has its specific styling and this has its specific styling? Because these both are on the same level of the body tag. They are both a form tag. So if I do this, this CSS is going to apply to both these forms, and that's not what I want. Well, that's when classes and IDs come into the equation, right? We can give these a label so we know which one is which. And we have to choose between using a class or an ID. Well, typically, you want to start at the lowest level of specificity possible, right? Because let's say in the future you maybe change your mind and you want to override that that CSS for a very specific tag. Well, at that point, if those tags already have classes, then you can just increase the specificity and give it an ID as well. That way you can override the previous style, right? So we always want to start with the lowest level of specificity. And the lowest level, as we know right now, is the element tag, but that's not going to work in the situation because we have two forms, right? We have two form tags. The next one is going to be class, right? So we'll probably want to give these specific classes. The sign up form will have a class of sign up, and the survey form will have a class of survey, right? And now, with these having their individual classes, I can specifically only grab the forms that have this class of survey, right? Or this class of sign up, right? I now have the ability to be able to grab things depending on what they're categorized in. And let's go ahead and let me link my CSS. And let's open this up with live server. We don't have anything in the form, so let's actually add something in here. Let's say input placeholder email. I'm adding some input fields here so I can visually see what's going on. And this attribute that's an input tag is called a placeholder, right? If you ever seen an input box that has like some text in it already, but it's like grayed out, well, that's done by this attribute right here called placeholder, right? We see here that email is kind of grayed out within it, and I can kind of add text in there, and it removes that grayed out text. So that's how that's done, if you guys ever wondered, right? So right here, this is where my sign up form is at. And then the survey, let's add a couple input tags here so we can see as well. Placeholder, rate of course. Placeholder, would you recommend our course to others? Right. We have these two. Now let's try to do some CSS. I only want to change the CSS for my sign up page. So to do that, I would have to come to my CSS file, and to only get the sign up, I want to grab it by its class, not the element, not the element tag, but by its class. And to do that, we have to utilize either the hashtag or the dot, depending on whether it's a class or an ID. And for classes, we're going to use a dot right before the name of the class. And this is going to let our CSS know, hey, this is not an element. This is not some kind of ID. This is only a class. So back to our CSS document, I'm going to say dot to let it know it's a class, and then pass in the class name, which is sign up. And let's say padding, or let's go with background color. Background color is going to be red. And we now see that it specifically only formatted this form here because this is the only thing that has the class of sign up, right? And then we can do the same thing for the survey. If I only want to grab the survey form, I would say dot survey. And we would say background color blue.
What if you were trying to like make the actual boxes themselves a specific color?
The boxes themselves a specific color, yes, that's good, right? How would we do that? Well, in that case, we would have to add a little bit more stuff in here. We might have to add a class to the input tag, right? That way you can only format the specific input field. Make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Could you, instead of doing that, use CSS like we were doing before last night? You have nested value or nested elements. Could you do a form and then an input nested within that form to do the same thing, or would that not work?
What do you mean?
Go back to your CSS.
Oh, okay.
Could you do dot survey or dot sign up and then nested input?
Input.
Yeah.
That is a good question. Let's first and foremost, I'm not quite sure what CSS we can add to the actual box. I've never actually tried to change the box. Let's see. Let's go to W3 schools. And let's go to the input tag. I wonder. Does it have any styling? Can you dial a input tag with CSS? I like this question, so I really want to figure out what it takes. Let's go with. Okay, yeah, we definitely can. We can add some. We can probably add a border. All right, so right now, look at it here. We don't have anything there, so let's go with border. We'll say 5 pixels so we can really see it. Solid black. And there you go. You definitely can. Pretty cool, right? So you definitely can, instead of giving it specifically that class or ID to that individual input tag. And going back to that question that Jason had brought up, like, this seems kind of redundant. Why would we do the nested stuff? Why would we use ID of classes? You definitely can. Whatever makes you feel better, right? Whatever you want to do, Jason, it's okay, right? We can reach both outcomes the same way, or the same outcome with both ways, right? I think it's going to depend on how you want to structure your application, right? If you want to add that level of specificity, if it's that unique of an element or not, it's however you want to do it. It's think of it as an SOP, right? It's more SOP than anything, right? Like a standard operating procedure of how your team does it or how you do it. There is no right or wrong answer of how to go about it when it comes to that. If it works for you, if that's how you like doing it, it makes sense to you guys, it's readable, your team can understand it, then go that route, right? So, but both ways work. Make sense, guys? All right. So good stuff. Now let's go ahead and come back here and let's talk about IDs, right? So we just discussed classes, but let's say it's a year or 2 years later. I'm trying to revamp my web page. I don't really like how it looks anymore. I was in a red and blue phase, but now I'm feeling it a little dark. I want to go with some more darker colors. You know, my wife just left me, took the kids, and lost the house, so I'm feeling a little gloomy. So let's go ahead and let's change the feeling of my application. So imagine there's hundreds or 200 lines of code here. And I could scour through all of this and try to figure out where it's at, or and maybe reformat all these different tags. Or what I can also do is kind of just come back to what I specifically want to update and increase the level of specificity and give it an ID, right? And that's just one scenario that you might encounter. You might, there might be different reasons why you want to add some more specific CSS to something very unique. Like I told you guys, there's one like a specific button or section that just it's unique compared to everything else. You can add a little bit more specificity here to kind of override all the previous CSS that's come before it. And we'll just give this ID called dark, right? And as we know from the levels of specificity, elements being the lowest, then it goes class and then ID. Even though class is set up here on this form, when I add this ID, if this ID has some CSS that overrides the signup class, then the signup class is going to be pretty much, it won't even matter, right? So we can come back to here. And thanks to the cascading effect of our CSS, at the very bottom, if I wanted to override something that came before it, I definitely can. But to call an ID, we don't use a dot, we use a hashtag, right? We use hashtag and then the name of the ID, which is going to be dark. And then this time, I'm going to give it a different background color. And it's going to be gray. Right? It's going to be gray. And we come back here. The class was overridden by the ID. It still has both, but ID has a higher level of specificity. So therefore, whatever that class was trying to style, it no longer matters. And you might think, so well, why not just delete the whole class? Well, maybe the class has a bunch of other lines of more CSS, like the border, the fonts, the height, the padding, the margin. But we didn't want to delete everything. We just really want to just change the background color. Then this is a scenario where we can do that. That way, the other stuff that's coming with that class is still in effect, right? But specifically, the color is changing, right? Because if we go back to this class right here and we say border 2 pixels solid yellow, that's not overridden, right? The only thing that was overridden was the background color. So just by adding an ID, it does not mean my class is now irrelevant. It's still absolutely relevant. Everything else that's not being overridden by this ID is still in effect, but this ID is specifically changing the color, and it's a higher level of specificity than our class. Do I have any questions, guys, on the ID or classes? Okay. Here's an interesting one. And I feel like I missed this when we were talking about relationships. We talked about how to grab a element that's directly nested after a different element, or an element that's nested but not directly afterward. It's somewhere deep inside the section tag, but it's underneath an article tag. We talked about how these relationships will work. Well, let's talk about this one, the P plus P. How do you think this is going to work? What do you think is going to change to red? Take a wild guess.
Is it going to be like, well, because the other one is like any like tag followed by, or any element directly followed by another one. Will P plus B be like there has to be two of them by each other?
Yeah, that's a very, very good guess. So we do P plus P, P plus P, and we say color is yellow. The second P is the only one that changed, right? Because it's saying that, hey, it has to be a paragraph that comes after a paragraph on the same level, right? It wasn't the arrow specifying that it was nested within it. The plus sign is essentially saying that they're on the same level, they're next to each other, right? That this specific paragraph tag has to come after another paragraph tag. Now, what if we add a third paragraph tag? How would that look like?
Would that be just the middle ones colored?
Yeah, it would be just the middle one. Oh, okay, I'm done. Never mind. It looks like it did everything else afterwards. I'm actually kind of curious how this works.
Is that because it's like kind of when you added that third one, it's kind of like forgetting the first P and then just taking the two last ones?
I don't think it's forgetting the other P. I think what it's doing here is that it's checking two P tags, but it's going to format the one that comes after a P tag. So this one gets formatted. And then it gets to this P tag. Is this P tag coming after a P tag? Well, that is actually true as well. So these get formatted as well. And it'll keep doing that the more I add, right? But if we do P plus P plus P, it's only going to format a paragraph that comes after a paragraph that came after a paragraph, and now it should only form as a third one. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, to be frank, I've never really had to use this. Right? I've never had to grab an element in this matter. It's not very commonly used. I use classes or IDs. I'm not gonna waste my time with this stuff. If you want to use it or you really like this method, you definitely can. It's just here to show you that you can do it, right? Of how the relations work with the CSS. All right, we're gonna take about 10 minutes to try out the specificity.html. Especially because today we're actually able to cover a little bit more in depth. Yesterday, we were running out of time and we didn't really get to cover class year IDs. But here we have an HTML document. We have different tags here. We have H1, we have sections with headers in it. And you're going to notice that some of these have IDs and classes, but then you also see some classes that have 3 different things in it, right? And you might think to yourself, is this all one class? Technically, it is not. Technically, these are 3 different classes within this class attribute. And then we're going to talk about a little bit of how that works, right? But your objective for the assignment is to be able to do these 4 lines, which, to be honest, I think it shouldn't take more than 5 minutes. So we'll take 5 minutes to do this and see if we can get it working. We're gonna stay here in the room. All we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and turn off our cameras. And the moment you're done, just turn them back on. All right. So when I see you guys back on the screen, then I know that we are good to go. But give this a try and see if you can change the styling of the text with the CSS. So we'll either take 5 minutes or until I see you guys turn back your cameras. So I'll see you guys in a bit. Good stuff. You guys are doing really good with the CSS. I feel very confident with you guys. Let's go ahead and give this a try. So, from the top, please make only Rhino and Zebra blue. And I am absolutely horrible. Of course, I don't have my CSS pulled up. There we go. So we have to make Rhino and Zebra blue, and we see here that Rhino and Zebra have multiple classes and IDs. Well, Rhino and Zebra both have Africa and 4 legs. It would make sense that I want to start with the lowest level of specificity. So I would want to do classes. But before I do this, I might want to make sure that nothing else has Africa and 4 legs. That's going to change anything else, So I see here that nothing else had Africa or 4 legs. So I'm probably free to use CSS on either one of the specific classes. Now, which one you choose is going to be up to you, whether it's Africa or 4 legs, but either one or the other is what you would want to call when adding the CSS. So let's go ahead and do, I'm going to take Africa. So I'll say dot Africa. And we want to make the font blue, I would assume here. So we'll say blue. So Rhino and Zebra are now blue. Then we can move forward. We can say, please make only Hufflepuff gold. And Hufflepuff here is on line 23. We want to make this one gold. It has Harry Potter, Triwizard Champ, and Badger. I don't think anything else has that. So let's do, I'm going to say Badger. So I'll say dot Badger, color gold. Now Hufflepuff is gold. And we say, please select duck with the highest level of specificity possible. Well, I have 2 classes on duck. Which one I choose, I believe it's honestly kind of irrelevant here. It's going to be either one or the other. It's likes to quack or fight 10 or 100. Or fight 1 or 100. That's actually kind of funny. By the way, I didn't make these. Guillermo made these, so it's kind of funny seeing these sometimes. And with the highest level of specificity possible, right now, as it is, it would be class. But if I wanted to increase the specificity, I could add an ID or add some inline CSS. But let's go ahead and we'll just stick to the assignment without messing anything up. I'll just say it likes to quack. Likes to quack, and I believe I typed it in correctly. And we have to select it, but it doesn't say anything else besides selecting it. So let's go and I'll just make color red. And then please select Rhino with the highest level of specificity possible. Well, thankfully we used the class earlier, so we can use Rhino with the ID. So we'll say dot Rhino, and I'll say color green. And it was a pretty straightforward assignment, but what the biggest thing here was the opening up the conversation.
Wouldn't it be hashtag?
Oh, thank you. You're absolutely correct. Hashtag, yes. No wonder it didn't change. I appreciate it. Sometimes I get tunnel vision as well. But you're absolutely correct. Good catch, Jason. Good stuff. Gold star to you. But back to the assignment. The assignment is very straightforward. The biggest reason for this is to open up the conversation of what's going on here, Roger. Why do we have different classes? Like, what's the point of having different classes? Well, the extra classes honestly just give you more flexibility of how you want to add styling to the specific class, right? So you can add some reusability here. Let's say we have a different animal here, and we'll give this an ID of duck, and the class is going to be 2 legs. Actually, maybe duck is not the best. I don't know if it's in Africa. Let's go with ostrich. Are there ostriches in Africa? I don't know. I'm really bad at this. But ostriches have 2 legs, but they're also in Africa, right? Africa. Notice that before we change rhino, zebra, and ostrich, all 3 of these are supposed to be blue. We ended up changing rhino to a different color thanks to the assignment, but because of the CSS of Africa, anything that has the class Africa is supposed to be blue. But there is a difference between ostrich and rhino and zebra, and that's the fact that ostrich only have 2 legs, but these other tags here, these rhinos specifically, only supposed to have 4 legs. So we might want to add a different type of CSS if it's also from Africa, but if it has 2 legs or if this has 4 legs, right? So we can have that extra class and say 2 legs. They have to have a border of 2 pixels solid blue, right? And although all 3 of these are supposed to be in Africa, let me comment out rhino for now. So it's all blue. I can see, but just by looking at the CSS, I know that all 3 of these are from Africa, but specifically ostrich, it has 2 legs, therefore it has the border. So you can add certain levels of CSS, but some might be a little bit more specific than others, that they require something different style, some kind of different styling. So ostrich specifically will get a different type of border in comparison to rhino and zebra. All 3 of these are from Africa, so they should all be blue. But ostrich is a different type of animal in comparison to rhino and zebra, right? And you can do that with buttons, right? If you had multiple buttons, right, to do different things on your web page, but there's one specific button, and that's like your logout button. Maybe that button specifically should be able to be red, or to kind of catch the attention of your user. It should have the CSS of everything else, like the sizing should be the same. Maybe the border, the background color, but maybe when you hover over this specific button, it needs to change color to red to let you know, hey, this is specifically a sign out button. So it has a very unique style to it. Well, that's when you want to add maybe an additional class. And that keeps you away from using an ID, so you can keep the specificity low, but add a different type of styling that's very unique to this element. Does that make sense for you guys?
Yeah, it does. I have a quick question regarding the specificity.
Sure.
So on mine, can you go back to your specificity.hotmail? On mine, I kind of forgot to do like the lowest level of class, and I kind of didn't do best practice. I just did section. I did the dot class or dot top class, and then turned that blue. And I know obviously the ID level is higher than the class. So if like on mine, I did dot top, so it turned both the rhino and zebra blue. If I still did the dot rhino green, will it not turn that rhino green anymore, or will still just not best practice to do it like that? Does that make sense? I can show you too if that works.
Yeah, maybe show me so I can understand a little bit better of what you're trying to convey.
Okay, so share my screen. So you can see that. That's how mine is, obviously. There's that. And then if I go to my specificity, so I did like this, the dot top right here. So that turned both the rhino and zebra blue. And then I did the best house, which again, I kind of forgot to go lowest level, right? So I didn't do best practice. So that turned to gold, and then that same thing. But then it turned to green. So it like obviously still does work. Is it just that I just kind of did the not best practice?
It's not that it's wrong, right? It's fine. The what would make it an issue would if there's other elements like also within that section, right? Because I think they're the rhino and zebra are underneath a section tag, right? But what if you had other stuff in there? It's gonna format everything else inside the section, right? But we want to specifically only change rhino and zebra, and that's where you might encounter some conflicts. It like I said, it's not wrong. But if you had other stuff in here, it would also format that. So you want to keep that in mind. Make sense?
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. And that's going to conclude the specificity part of the assignment. We're gonna take a 10-minute break. When we come back, we're gonna go over the divs, boxes, and talk a little bit more of how that helps structure the rest of our web page. You'll be able to see how essentially the BBC website was able to put everything in specific size. We're gonna mess around a little bit with the alignments and kind of maybe centering things on your web page, moving them to left to right to the bottom, and so on and so forth. And after that, we're gonna jump straight into JavaScript. Right. So let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 6:41, and I'll see you guys then. All right, let's go ahead and come back and continue with today's lesson. So we just finished talking about specificity, IDs, and classes. We're going to finish off today's lesson for CSS, talking about the box model, right? And what it actually means when it comes to our web page. Well, as you may have already gotten kind of an idea with the previous things I've been saying, everything on your web page is honestly just a box, right? Everything on the web page is a box. It tends to be categorized with divs or with semantic tags like articles, section, navs, but it's just a bunch of squares when you look at the nitty-gritty of it all, right? And these squares are formatted with different property like height, width, padding, border. This all makes the box, and you should see this picture and have an idea of what it is already by looking at the inspect tool that I demonstrated yesterday. And if we visit our other web pages, like we check out BBC page again, we can see how it's all a bunch of boxes. All right, so we're here at the BBC website. If we go to inspect tool, and I press this kind of dotted screen with the arrow, it lets me select elements that are currently within this page. And just selecting over an image, we see that this is a box itself. The text itself is wrapped in a box. This is all a box, this whole section right here is a box. This is a box itself. right? We have box that holds everything in its entirety, right? The right section is a box. All these are all just boxes, right? And they're all, and when you dive deeper into the elements, they're all just a bunch of divs. And that's literally what everything is. So when it comes to CSS, when you style your elements, it's good practice to categorize them with divs or semantic tags, and then format these divs to be able to reach the outcome that you see here on this BBC website. And this is just a very quick example. We could check something like what's another website?
You could do ESPN.
ESPN. That's a good one. Let's check out ESPN. And it's gonna be the exact same thing. Boxes upon boxes upon boxes. It loads up. We can use the element tool again. Even though these are kind of circled corners, it's still a box when you look at the nitty-gritty of it all, right? All these are boxes.
For those like sorry to interrupt. Those like circle ones, like the create account or login. That was like when you had adjusted the like that percentage, right, for the boxes. I can't remember what it was called, but you did it a little bit yesterday.
Yeah, it was border radius. Let me give me a second. Let me exit out of my Steam. I apologize for the little icon popping up on the bottom. But yeah, that's your border radius, right? And we can see a quick demo of that real quick here. If I go to the style.css and I change the radius for, let's say, the ostrich, I can say border. We'll say oh, we already have a border, not bad. We'll say border dash radius. And we see a couple things already popping up with border. We can manipulate the border a lot. We can do border style. Dash, dotted, double, groove, hidden. But let's go with border radius. And I believe I set it to 50%. Well, because it's a very long box, it's trying to make the circle, but you see it's a little weird here. If we say the width is 50 pixels, it might look a little bit better. There you go, something like that. But as you can see, it does impact it, right? We'll say height is 50 pixels. Let's change it up maybe to 200 by 200 with 50%. There you go. Right, we'll see the circle. That border radius impacts the corners and it starts kind of rounding it out. So yeah, most definitely. But everything here is a box. This is just a box that was formatted to look like a circle, but you start off with a box. Make sense? Here we have the diagram once again. You have where the content is at the original box itself. You set the height and the width, right? By default, the padding and the border, I'm not quite sure what it's set to, but it's set to very, very minimal. And then you can fix the padding, and the padding we see here is the space between your border and your actual element itself. Then you have your border, and then the space outside of the border, that is your margin, right? And we're going to see how this works in a little bit with the next practice one here. We have the box model.html. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do the student practice here for you guys. We'll walk through it together just to get a good example of it. So let's go ahead and open it up. Close out specificity, and let's look at the bottom. Okay. Open with Light Server. There we go. So we have here the text or our HTML document. It's already pre-formatted for you guys. I'll give you guys the option. Do you guys want to give this a try yourself, or do you want for me to walk through it and we can talk through it as I go?
I'd like to follow along, but I'm trying to find it. Where was it?
Yeah, it's still within the CSS lesson, so lesson 03. It's in the it should be an intro to CSS.
Oh, the box model. There it is. All right, thank you.
Yeah, box
Um,
model.
That's something I think I would like to do myself too, but it'd probably take more than like 5 minutes. It'd probably take a little bit longer.
Okay. Yeah, so we do have more assignments. I believe where's it at? Practice layouts. This is gonna be where you're gonna get the most bang for your buck. We have a couple layouts that you guys will be able to attempt on your own. So we'll definitely try that out. But let's do the talk through because I know I didn't give too much instruction about it. And then we can use the practice layout to kind of try to replicate what we were doing. And then to get more practice, we can take that BBC website that we worked on yesterday and then add some boxes there and actually try to use the CSS that we've been learning to format that BBC website to look a little bit more like the actual original. So looking at this, I have the H1, this is an H2 paragraph. We have a couple spans. Let's look at the CSS. We have to make the H1 30 pixels with a little padding on the left and thin red border. And I think it just wants to get the H1 element. We don't see any classes or IDs, so let's go ahead and give that a try. We're going to say H1. And notice that we're not using divs here yet. We're specifically grabbing the element, right? So you can add padding, you can add a border, margin, as you've seen it already. On regular element, it doesn't have to be a div, but you can do it with the element itself. But with the H1 element here, we're going to do the font size is going to be 30 pixels. We're going to put a little bit of padding on the left, so we'll say padding left. And let's just go with 5. Let's do percent. We haven't enough percent yet. There we go, 5%. You see that it moved a little bit. And we have to add a thin red border. So we'll say border, 1 pixel, solid red. And you kind of already start seeing how that's working here. Let's manipulate the padding on the left to 50%. And we see here how that moved. So there's padding between the actual element and the border, right? Let's do background color so we can kind of visualize that a little bit more. Background color, we're going to say black. Maybe that's too dark. Let's say yellow. And I wonder if we can see the margin left to 50 pixels. Right, there's a margin right here. This whole element actually goes all the way to the left, but you don't see it unless you hover over it with your element. This is still all the H1 element, which call it that space right there by the border and the edge of your window. That is where the margin's at. And then the space between your border and your actual text, this is your padding right here. If we set padding to 0, you'll see here that there's no space between your border and your text. But we only have a little padding, so we'll do 10 pixels. And let's get rid of the margin left. I'm gonna keep the background color just so we can see a little bit better. Let's go to the H2. It's gonna be font size of 25 pixels. It wants padding on the top and bottom, but no specific sizing. So we'll say padding top, we'll say 50 pixels. Padding bottom to 50 pixels as well. And a thick gold border and margin on top. Okay, let's go with the border first. We'll say border, we'll say 50 pixels, solid, red is a little too thick. Let's go with 30. There we go. It formatted the H2. And it's supposed to be gold. My apologies. We'll say gold. There you go. And margin on the top and bottom. We'll say margin top, 10 pixels. Margin bottom, 10 pixels. There we go. Please make the spans, we'll call spans, have a thin black border. So it's a border, 1 pixel, solid black. A little padding. It didn't specify where, so we'll just do padding, 10 pixels. And we don't see it really working here. It's somewhere in the text. But if we add the color to blue, we should be able to see it stand out. And I put spans as plural, not singular. There we go. Now we see the spans. Okay. So we get the spans working. Now we can definitely identify where that is at as well. And let's look at these sections. We'll say section. It's going to say width is going to be 25%. 200 pixels tall, so that's going to be our height. And it looks a little messed up, if I'm being honest with you, but let's continue. Centered, we'll say text align center. And align items center. There we go. With thin purple border. With a border, 1 pixel, solid purple. So we can see it a little better. Okay. Let's open it up. There we go. Now we're seeing something here. And that's pretty much it. We're able to manipulate the divs, the text, the sizing, the color to really see how the boxes are working. Everything itself is a box, right? They had a span within this text, right? When we look at the HTML, notice there is a span within this h2 element. So when we formatted that span, this is an actual element within the text, right? So we're able to put a box around it specifically. Do I have any questions on the border assignments, the different styling that I use here, whether it's border, margin, padding, the font size, color, anything at all before we try out the layouts? All right, let's take a couple minutes to do layout 1. Actually, not layout 1. Let's try. Yeah, we can do layout 1. Layout 2 and layout 3 can be some additional assignments that you guys can do on your own time. But we'll give layout 1 a try. I want you to take this image as if it's the entirety of your screen. So looking here, how do you think this will work? So right off the bat, I'm going to tell you, you might want to use divs. So ignore any other element. Just put a bunch of divs within divs. So you might want to have one big div that will take the entirety of your screen, right? You might want to have 4 other divs within here, and then you're going to figure out the heights to give it this kind of appearance. And then within these divs, some of these might have some additional divs that have to be centered or aligned to each other or not. All right, so use divs to kind of reach this, and then maybe use different colors for each layer and some borders so you can also see the differences between the different layers. We'll take 10 minutes to give this a try before we see someone demonstrate their code. Do I have any questions on layout 1? All right, time is 7:57. Let's go ahead and come back at 7:07. See if we can replicate this image with nothing but boxes, colors, and borders. All right, let's go ahead and give this a quick try, and we can kind of close the gap on the confusion that I see in y'all's faces. So let's go ahead and try to replicate layout 1, right? So we have what kind of looks like a bunch of boxes within boxes. As I mentioned to you guys, you might want to create one big div that wants to hold all of these. So we're going to take it one step at a time. We'll say we're going to create that, that big div. And we'll call this, we'll give it a class as well, so we're able to identify what we're looking at. We'll call it top div. And within this div, it looks like we have 4 other divs. We're gonna take it slowly.
Do you mean to share your screen? Because we just see you.
Thank you for bringing it up. Yes, absolutely. I was trying to share my screen. My apologies. Okay, yeah. So hopefully now we should all be looking at my screen now. This is the layout that we're trying to replicate. And we are trying to make a div to hold all these other divs within here. Here's my HTML example. I created that top level div that's going to hold the 4 layers from left to right of my layout. And I'm going to give it a class name as well so I can kind of manipulate this div because we're going to have a bunch of divs within divs. So we gave it the class of top div. And I'm going to take it one step at a time. I'm going to do the layers first. And to do that, within this big div, I'm going to make 2 or 3 divs, my apologies. I'll make 4 divs here. And let's give these a class as well. And this will be called layers. Or I guess we call them rows. And we're gonna do some CSS so we get something visually on our screen here to give a better representation of what's actually happening on our application. All right. So now that we have that, let's go to the CSS. I'm gonna go ahead and comment out the stuff here. And I believe I'm in the right one. I am. Yeah. Okay, good. And here I'm gonna say rows, and I'm gonna give them the color of. Actually, let's add a border first so we can see the border. We'll say 1 pixel solid red. And because it's a class, it needs a dot. And why is it not doing what I want it to do? Oh, my bad. I'm using the wrong example here. Let me go ahead and copy this. I'm gonna make a new file here. I'm gonna say layout.html. And this has a weird icon. It's not an HTML icon. So I'm assuming layouts or layout, the word layout itself is a reserved word because it had a weird icon. And then let's go ahead and create a other file called layouts.css. I'm gonna go ahead and copy and paste this. And let's connect the CSS file. Cool. Let me open this bad boy with live server. And now we can add the CSS in here. There we go. Now we're getting somewhere. Now it looks a little weird, right? Because right now there is no height to these divs. Before, when we were adding, styling to the different elements, those elements had text. So by default, the elements took the height and the width of the size of our font. But because there's nothing within these divs, it's kind of all crunched up. So let's add some height here. We're gonna say height of, because there's 4, I'm gonna say 25%. And now I'm not getting what I want to get. What if I say 25 view height? There we go. Awesome. Now I'm getting somewhere. Right here we see all 4 rows. they're all the same height. And is that what I'm trying to reach? Not exactly, right? I'm able to, I can see it says here, I have the spacing, but these are not really the exact size. What it looks like probably is that the top row and the bottom row are probably 25% of the view height, which will make about half, maybe. And these are probably somewhere between, actually probably less. This is probably 10%, or 25, maybe. We could say 20, 20. It'll be 40%, which will leave you with 60. This could be 40, and this could be 30, right? So these might be about 20% of the view height. So we might want to change how these work, or what exactly style, what kind of style we add to these, right? So let's go ahead and maybe add a little bit more specific styling to these two right here. So let's change the class to or give it row 20, row 20, right? These have some very specific styles. That way we can have borders for all of these, but only these specific two are going to have a very specific height. And the height should be of 20 view height. And notice that these changed already, right? The view height did change. They all have the same border, but these two specific ones, for row 20, should have a view height of 20 instead of 25, right? And these get overridden because of the cascading effect. The other two, they don't. They still maintain the original height of what rows has, right? Now let's go back to our layouts. So we got the height for these two. This seems to be kind of like a 40, and this might be, actually this might be, what can you say? If these two are 20, that would make 40% of our page, which leaves us with 60. So this might have to be 35. This could be 25. Something similar to that. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I need to add some specific styling to this one and a very unique styling to this one as well. So we'll make this one row of something, and this will be a row of another. So going back here, I'll say row. Let's go with 25. And I'll say row 35. Now, is my math correct? Yeah, this should make 60. Is that correct? Quick math. I was a soldier, man. I didn't go to college. So I'm a little slow on these.
Yeah, that's 60.
All right, so this should have a view height of 25. This should have a view height of 30. So let's come back down here. We'll say row of 25. And I'll say height 25 view height. And this will be a row of 35 with a height of 35. View height. That's why it's not changing. There we go. And once again, we have the full screen. Again, we have some issues here on the edges, which you might have noticed, which we'll address at the very end. But now we kind of formatted the layers to match what this layout is showing us. So that's the first step. Now we can tackle these divs that are supposed to be in row 2 and in row 3, right? But these divs don't exist yet. So let's go to row 2, and we can add 3 divs in here. We'll say div, and we'll copy these right here. And then the third row needs to have 2 divs. And just to keep everything uniform, let me add some spaces here so I can visualize a little bit more of what exactly this is doing. Actually, maybe it's better the other way. Yeah, we'll just keep it like this. Maybe this is a little bit more readable. Hopefully it's readable to you guys. All right, let's work on row 2 first. It looks like these are evenly divided between the left and the right to each other. So they split evenly amongst this div. So maybe we can add a view width of like 33% to these rows to split them up evenly. So let's give them a class. This will be column we'll say row 2 column, and then we'll give the same class to all of these. And now we can do some formatting. Let's call these columns here. So we'll say row 2 column. And let's add a border so we can see it. It'll be 1 pixel, solid blue. And it should be all crunched up. I figured we're gonna set the height. I believe we'll do 100%. Oh, okay. It looks a little weird. Not exactly what I was looking for.
Should it be the same height as the div that it's in?
Yeah, it probably makes sense if it is. So we can say 25 view heights. And it's not doing what I was. Oh, it is doing it. My apologies, it is. But look how it's stacking up because they're not aligned. So let's just do 10 pixels for now so we can kind of see it where they're at. We can see them all within the box, and then we'll fix the height in a bit once we align these. But the width should be 33 view width. And they're good, right? But they're not aligned. And that's the issue here. We want these to be aligned to each other to fill up from left to right. And that's going to be the next biggest issue here, and probably the issue that you guys were encountering it. And to do this, we want to use something called flex.
Oh, flex.
I'm pretty sure it's Flexbox. What was it? It was something flex. Flex auto. What was it?
I used float inline start.
We could use flex. I think display flex. And then we can say align items. Or justify content, actually. Justify content. We can say space evenly. And align items. How can we do this? There has to be, I forgot the method. I'm a little rusty on my CSS. We want to use display flex. Justify content. We did space even. What do we do center? No. Oh, I think I remember flex direction. There we go. Flex direction. Row. Or column. No, I'm pretty sure it was flex direction. Flex. I could have sworn it was flex direction. All right.
Can you use float?
On which one?
For the columns, if you do float inline start and they add up to 100, it should. That's how I did it, at least.
For flex direction, we can say float. Is that what you're saying?
No, float is instead of flex direction, it's float colon inline start or inline end.
I'm not getting an option. Let's check W3 schools.
No,
Handy
it's
dandy
colon.
So
Float colon, and then inline. Yeah. Or inline start.
inline start. There has to be a better way of doing this if I'm being honest with you. Inline start. Yeah. It's
I think
working.
your math is coming out to more than 100% is why it's not working.
Maybe.
Maybe with your borders or your padding or something.
Yeah. Let's check out Flexbox because Flexbox is what we really want to use. It's really helpful. CSS. Flexbox. There we go. Flexbox is very powerful. We can use inline. It's just a little outdated. Where's the properties? Flex container, flex responsive, flex and flex direction. See, this is supposed to be working. For some reason, it's not doing what I want to do. Let's lower the width to 20 view width. There we go. Oh, this is the inline one. I'll comment out and I'll keep it there. But flex direction is supposed to honestly work. Unless, has it been updated since the last time I ran this class? Flex wrap? No. Flex direction row. Let's look at the inspect tool. Oh, my bad. Rookie mistake. I know why I'm messing this up. Okay, Tim. I'll show you why this didn't work. Your method works, absolutely, right? But the reason why the method I'm trying to teach you doesn't work, and this is a very rookie mistake, I can't believe I just missed it, is because I'm trying to add Flexbox in these boxes, right? But what that's going to do, what that's telling to my CSS is that I'm trying to organize the items inside of this box, but I'm not trying to do that. I want to organize the stuff inside the entire box, right? Because these boxes exist inside of this box. Does that make sense? So right now I'm doing flex inside of these, but there's nothing in here. So obviously I don't visually see anything, but I need to format this, right? So let's go ahead and go back. The width was fine. 33 will say view width, right? But what I need to organize is not the columns themselves, but the row, right? Row 2. Row 2, 5. This needs to be display, flex. Let me add a column here. There you go. Just by adding flex, it automatically organized the items in that box. My apologies. That was my fault. But I was putting the CSS in the wrong element. When I was using flex, I was using it in this container specifically. Therefore, saying the items inside of this div right here, these small individual ones, I want you to align those items, but that wasn't the correct way of doing it. I had to grab this div to align the items within the overall row, and those items are these individual divs. Does that make sense for you, Tim? Your way wasn't working specifically for this demonstration, but it's not that it was wrong either. It was working if I wanted to align it specifically on these items. But I saw both of them work the flex box, the reason why I was very adamant about it is because it's the most common way of doing things, in the way that it gives you more flexibility, no pun intended, right? But let's continue with that. We have display flex, but automatically it already did it for me, but I'm able to mess with the direction and say column instead. Instead of doing it in a row, you'll see they'll bring it back down this way, right? But by default, it goes into a row. Now let's go back to the individual column and let's give it a height of 100%. And there you have it. It's going to take 100% of the container of where it is in, right? 100% of the container. Because this isn't the top level, it exists within this row right here. 100% means 100% of this specific row. Does that make sense for y'all?
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right, right on. Let's do that again, but this time let's do it for row 3. Right, row 3 has its individual divs. Let's give it classes. Class, row 3, column, class, row 3, column. Let's call the class. We'll give it a border again so we can see it. 1 pixel, solid blue. I'm gonna give it a height of 100% and a width of 50% because it's only 2 of them. We'll say 50 view width. And now we have to align them. So I want to manipulate the row in which they're in. So I'm gonna go over here and say display selects. And there you go. We successfully replicated layout 1. Make sense, y'all?
Yep.
Do I have any questions on how this I achieved it? I'm sorry if I confused you a little bit there with the flex box when I was going through it. I was doing it in the wrong area, which is why it wasn't working.
I did
No,
it
I mean,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Nope, you can go.
I was gonna say I did it a different way. I achieved the end result, but I used a different method using the float inline start inside like a master container to do everything and then row by row. Is there a reason that there's a preference either way?
Because Flexbox gives you a lot more flexibility. And let's give it a try. Let's add more boxes in here, more than just 3. Let's go ahead. Let's add 6 more, right? And now we see that it's looking a little weird. Let's go to the CSS. Let me put it here. Flexbox is a little bit more responsive, which is why we really enjoy Flexbox, right?
Because you don't have to specify the exact math on the width.
Yeah, pretty much, right? So if we come here for the column, I can say we'll make what did we do? If I do 100%, it's gonna look a little weird. Did not. No, it's working perfectly fine. Row 2 column. Oh my bad, I'm doing the wrong one. No, this is correct. Row 2 column. Yeah. If I do 100%, I still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Right, all 9 of them take it because Flex is smart enough to be able to make them fit. Right, but maybe this isn't exactly how I want it. Let's go with height. I'm only gonna take 50% of the height. Let's see how that looks like. 50. And then I want the width to be very specific. Let's say 100 pixels. Go with 200 pixels. It's going to limit me, but if I do display flex. If I say justify content, space evenly. It's not gonna do it. Where is the flex wrap? Go justify content, space evenly. We say 100%. Oh. Flex wrap. Flex wrap, flex wrap, flex shrink. I wonder how this works. Inherit. Well, maybe I'm not conveying my message right off the bat exactly how I wanted to. But when we use float inline, did you notice how much options you got using float? Not very much, right? With Flexbox, it allows you to use a flex direction. You can wrap it around. You can shrink it or grow it. You can justify the content as well. Center it. You can put it at the end. And let's do that. Let's go to put it at the end. We can say flex end. And you'll see that's going to move. Okay, don't do that, I guess. Row 3-5. Oh, I'm using the wrong one. My apologies. We're going to put it over here. We're going to say flex n. Let's get rid of this. And row 2, flex wrap. Not doing what I want to do. Oh my lord.
I understand how the flex has more options. Are you limited at all by forcing everything to be the same width, or can you have different divs within that flex row at different sizes?
You could
So-
have them at different sizes, yes.
Okay, it seems like flex is just an updated way to float.
Flex n, was it just fine?
And it looks like flex is probably designed to build galleries.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to do something and it's not doing what I want to do. This is why I really hate CSS so much, or the front end. But yeah, it gives you a lot more flexibility of how to navigate it. And honestly, the best way of doing it, and I always have to kind of come back to this to really get a better understanding, is going to the README. You're going to encounter a really nice learning tool, which I really enjoy, and that's going to be the Flexbox Froggy. And if you really want to master Flexbox, I do this every now and then right before class. I just didn't get to do it. But this really lets you practice how to work with Flexbox, right? For example, here we have this frog, and the goal is to move the frog onto the lily pad. And it gives you the different commands that come with Flexbox. And here we have like justify content flex n. It will move the frog to the right, right? So, but it already has flex there for you. And you can use the commands and you will see how that would work and how it moves it. It's a very useful tool. I typically do this right before every time I teach this class because I get very rusty with my CSS. Here we wanted to center the contents of the items. So you have the different items that go into justify content, centers being one of them. Justify content, center, and you can see how you can manipulate the items in div, right, to center it. Very good practice tool. As I mentioned to you guys before, if you don't practice this tool, they're very perishable. And I'm a prime example of this. I don't use CSS too often, so I tend to forget how to work these. But this right here, space evenly, which is what I was trying to do, can split up your boxes within this div in a much more efficient manner. So definitely do give these a try. This one may not be the best one. I think space between will work here. Okay. Justify content. Flex start, flex end, center, space between, space around. It's another one. There's so many properties and property values that go into these that I tend to forget them. But Flexbox Froggy is a very good way to kind of practice these tools if you really want to get good with CSS and working with the different boxes and how to format your page. I constantly come back to this application whenever I get rusty with my CSS because it's a very good learning tool. And this tool can be found within the README of your lesson 3, right? If you go to lesson 3, Intro to CSS, you click it, you'll have a README in here, and you'll have a couple links of working with Flexbox. I highly recommend the Flexbox Froggy. I'm sorry if I did not do that good of a way to handle the Flexbox or the divs. I get very rusty with these. Do I have any questions before we move on? All right. We're going to take a quick 10-minute break right before we hit JavaScript, and then we'll spend an hour introducing JavaScript and how we're going to work with that. I'll see you guys at 7:49. All right, we should all be looking at my screen, guys. So to finish off the lesson with CSS, the CSS grid and Flexbox, the old way of doing things was by float, right? Which Tim was trying out, but as you might have already seen, there wasn't much that was available.
Do you mind if I ask something real quick?
Sure, Jason, go ahead.
That first layout, how did it end up looking? I didn't see. Okay.
Let me go ahead. Hold on, give me a second. Let me get rid of all these extra stuff that I added at the very, very end.
Because I just feel very confused now.
Yeah, no, I understand. Let me go to practice layout. Let me go ahead and delete a couple things from these. And I'm glad you brought it before I moved on, so we can handle that. So row 25 flex wrap, this. And then let's go ahead and put this to 33 view width. And then let's remove all these additional ones that we added in here. And now we can go to 100%. There you go. So this is how it's supposed to look. We even have the picture here to give you a visual representation. It's a little crunched up because obviously I have the screen minimized. But if we open it up, you'll see that it takes in the effect of that layout, right? So the CSS for that was that we essentially added flex to row 2 and row 3, right? So it's able to kind of evenly space out the boxes amongst this column here. I'm sorry, amongst this div. And the actual height and width of the columns here were dictated by how many I had, right? So for row 2, because there's 3 divs, I split the width to 33 view width, right? Because that's probably the most even number to 100% for 3. And the height, I set it to 100% of the container of where it's located at. So when we set a height to 100% for these inner divs, it took up the entirety of the div that it exists within, which was this div right here, right? So these divs all have 100% height, and that 100% is the total height of the div that they're nested within. Make sense? We did something very similar to Rule 3 as well, where we set the width of these individual columns to 50 view width because there's only 2 of them in here. So we split up that 100 view width of our application in half, and the height, once again, set to 100% to take in the height of the row that they're nested within. Does that make sense, Jason?
Yeah, I don't know what I think my HTML file might be a little different than yours because mine doesn't look like that, and I kind of feel like I was trying to follow along, but I'll probably just go back tomorrow through the video and just
Yeah.
look through it.
I believe that tangent that I went on at the very end might have really confused you guys. So I'll stay here a little bit later if you want me to take a look at your HTML and we can figure out what exactly was going wrong and then
Yeah,
figure it out.
that's okay. I'm probably just gonna go back and just review the video just for the
Okay,
sake of it, so we can move on.
that's fine. That's fine. No big issue here. All right. Well, to finish out the lesson once again, we talked about Flexbox. CSS Grid, it was a new way. I think Grid is one of the new ways that just came out. Some people enjoy Grid more than Flexbox. I was taught Flexbox. I enjoy it. I think it's an easier way of doing it. It's there's a lot of functionality to it, so every now and then you might have to kind of go back and revisit Flexbox if you want to make sure you stay up to date with it. But once again, going back to the specialization, right? Not everybody focuses on nothing but CSS. So depending on what you enjoy most is what you'll probably end up doing in your career, right? If you find a full stack role, you'll be able to do a little bit of everything. Some people really enjoy this process of working with the front end. I'm not a big fan of it because it's a little difficult to figure out what goes wrong with the front end in comparison to the back end. But you don't have to be a subject matter with CSS. Honestly, a quick Google search through W3 Schools or even ChatGPT will tell you exactly what you need to kind of reach the outcome that you're looking for. Honestly, the what makes a good person a great developer with the front end is just having that creative touch. I don't think I'm a very creative person, so I really don't really enjoy doing it. This is more of a design aspect. The old way of doing things was floats, as you know, Tim had attempted to do, and it worked, right? But it does not give you that much functionality as comparison to Flexbox and Grid. So, if you want to ensure that you can do a lot more with your CSS, definitely get better at either Flexbox or Grid. But that's going to conclude our CSS. If you guys have any further questions, now is the time before we move forward. All right. Then let's go ahead and close the chapter on CSS and let's talk about JavaScript. Adding JavaScript to the HTML and CSS that we have been working on. By the end of the JavaScript class, you should have an idea of, or you should have a very basic web page, which is going to be pretty cool to see it work. Now, really important idea, a computer can only do what you tell it to do. And this is very important now that we're jumping into JavaScript and actually adding functionality. HTML and CSS are pretty straightforward, very simple syntax. But when it comes to actually using a programming language like JavaScript or Python, it can get very tricky. And there's a very cool video that I like to see. And we're going to check it out real quick. And this honestly explains programming in a nutshell. It's a pretty famous video. I'm sure you guys have probably seen it before. We're not going to see the entirety of it, but I want to show you very quickly. And what this video is going to show you is whatever you tell your code to do, it's going to do exactly that, right? So the problem is never really with the code. It's going to be you guys, right? It's what your code is doing. You have to be very specific to what you want your code to do. And we'll take a quick, maybe 30 seconds to a minute to see this video. And this is a direct representation of what your code is doing when you tell it to do something.
No, I can't hear it. I don't know about the other people.
I can't hear the video.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and reshare. Share sound. There we go.
Get 2 pieces of bread out. Got 'em. Get a butter knife and get some PB. Take 1 piece of bread, spread it around with the butter knife.
No, Dad, with the peanut butter.
I'm just doing what it says. It says take 1 piece of bread, spread it around with the butter knife.
Hold on.
Get some jelly, rub it on the other half of the bread.
No, Dad, open the jelly.
Well, it doesn't say to do that. Put the breads together on top of each other. Take a big bite. This doesn't taste like a peanut butter jelly sandwich. Fail.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I had to make it extremely specific.
Oh, good. I'm starving. Take 2 pieces of white bread out of the bag. Take the lid off the jar of peanut butter. Get a butter knife and stick it inside of the peanut butter jar. With the knife, scoop a bit of peanut butter out
A bit, that means like a lot.
A bit means a lot?
In my world.
Spread your scoop of peanut butter onto 1 of your pieces of bread with the knife. All right. There we go.
You're doing better than before, though.
Open the jelly jar. Squeeze it onto the other piece of bread.
Nope.
Done. Closer.
You suck.
Get 2 pieces bread. Get some peanut butter. Take the peanut butter knife. Open the peanut butter. Put the knife in the PB. Get some jelly. Open the jelly.
No.
Squirt the jelly onto the bread.
You're supposed to...
Take the butter knife with the peanut butter on it. Wipe it all over the piece of bread that's blank. Take the butter knife, rub the jelly all over the piece of bread.
Oh, he's doing better. Oh.
It says all over. Put the 2 pieces on top of each other.
This isn't how I meant.
I hope you guys enjoyed the video. That quick little video there is one of my favorite ones because it really demonstrates what coding really is. Programs, your scripts, at its core value, it's honestly just instructions. And depending on how specific your instructions are, they're only going to do what you tell it to do, right? So when you code along and you're trying to reach an outcome, you have to take it very deliberately, step by step of what exactly you want to do. Coding is honestly just taking a big problem and breaking it down into much smaller problems that are easily more digestible. And you see here very easily that the dad was getting confused because he did exactly what the kids were telling him in the instructions, and it wasn't exactly what the kids were intending him for to do, but he only knows what he reads. Your program is only going to tell your computer to do whatever you tell it to do. So something to keep in mind whenever you're coding. It's not the computer's fault, it's your fault. All right, so be very specific with your code. Now, what is a program? As I just said, to reiterate, a program is a set of instructions that you write to tell the computer to do something, right? Whether it is to, sort through some data or to create an object, or in our case that we're about to see right now, to create HTML tags. If you want to add some elements or content to an HTML tag, it won't know what to do unless you tell it to do it very specifically. And programming is a task of writing those instructions in a language that the computer can understand, right? Once again, back to I think day 1. If you're good with languages, this should
just
come.
To let you know, we don't see the slides if you're going through them.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I do this every single time. Programming is this task of writing those instructions in a language that the computer can understand. So you are essentially learning a way to communicate with your computer to tell it to do something, right? Imagine being in Japan and trying to find the restroom. You need to have some kind of knowledge of Japanese to be able to communicate with this person to reach this outcome. And that's really what programming is. The language that we're going to be focusing on today is going to be JavaScript. And JavaScript has a lot of different functionalities, but it's very commonly used with front-end development. If I remember correctly, about 80 to 90% of almost all websites on the internet right now are built off of JavaScript. It's a very powerful language, and it's known as a high-level language. Now, a high-level language, the most basic definition of that is a language that is human readable, right? It's very friendly. It's very close to English, and it keeps all the nitty gritty stuff of the computer outside of it, right? So there's no dealing with the memory or your CPU or any of that hardware stuff. It's all very surface level, very English, easy to understand. A low-level languages are languages like assembly, which is one of the first languages, if not the first, I believe, that was used to communicate with computers. It used to be taught in colleges. I don't know if they still do, but assembly is able to really focus on the hardware. These languages use a lot of binary code as well. Not very easy to pick up. If you ever encounter a program written in assembly, you'll see how confusing it is. And JavaScript is going to allow us to, ignore all that extra mumbo jumbo and really focus on the meat and potatoes of our application. Quick note here is a book that Guillermo used to recommend. I've never read it. I kept it in here because he, swore on it. If you want to read this book, I highly recommend it because Guillermo recommended it. I've had a couple students before who have come to Foundation Programming who have read this book and they swore by it as well. So definitely look into it if you really want to learn a little bit more about computers, especially if you're not very computer savvy. Now, what makes up a web page? I kind of touched up on this a little bit when we started talking about HTML. But a web page is consisted of three different parts, which is your HTML file, which is the foundation and the structure of your application, right? This is the skeleton. This is what holds the actual structure of it, and you saw it whenever I used inspect to. Every website we go to has some kind of tree that shows you from top to bottom of how this application is structured. Then we have the CSS, which is the styling that controls the appearance of your application. And what we're going to be focusing on right now this evening is going to be the functionality, right? We've seen how to create an HTML page, how to style it a little bit, and now we're going to use JavaScript to actually make our page a little bit more dynamic than it was. Up to this point, everything that we've done has been very static, right? It wasn't really doing anything. It might as well just be a picture, right? It hasn't been close to an application yet. But we're going to use JavaScript to bridge that gap and finally make our websites do something. The DOM. The DOM is a concept that's a little bit difficult to kind of understand at first, right? The DOM stands for Document Object Model, right? It says it's a programming interface for web documents, but it's not what's the word I'm looking for? An actual solid concept, right? You don't actually see the DOM, but the DOM exists. And what do I mean by that? Well, the moment that you open with Live Server, right, and it opens up your tab on your computer, what happens is a DOM is instantiated, right? A DOM, a version of a DOM is created. And what this DOM does, it creates a replica of your HTML file, and it allows you to manipulate your HTML file using JavaScript, right? It represents the page, and it allows you to make it dynamic as you work. It's something very difficult to really understand because we don't visually see it. So maybe let's try it out. You have your HTML file that has your doc type. You have your HTML tag. And inside this HTML tag, you might have a body tag, and I'll just leave it there. right? And then you have your browser. And I'll keep it very simple. What happens when your application runs is that a copy of this file is created, right? A copy of your HTML document is created, your program. And this copy is what ends up being known as the DOM. Now, there's no actual way to really manipulate your file without this DOM. The reason for this DOM is it becomes the middleman between you and your browser and your HTML file, right? What we are going to do right now is we are going to write some code that's going to access the DOM and add new elements, right? So your JavaScript file, what it's going to do is going to send a command to this DOM that you want to do something. Like, hey, I want to add a new H1 element. The DOM is going to take these instructions from your JavaScript, and from those instructions, it's going to directly manipulate the HTML file that it copied itself from. And after it updates it, it's going to display it on your browser, right? And this all happens when you start running your application, right? You open live server, it's going to create a replica of this HTML file that allows you to access. Because when we use JavaScript to manipulate our application, we're not accessing the HTML file directly. We are accessing this DOM. It creates a virtual copy of your file that you can manipulate, and then this file updates the HTML file. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Quick question for like me personally to like be able to relate it to make sense. So is it kind of like the HTML file is like the main branch and the DOM is like another branch that you're manipulating to then update the HTML file?
Yeah,
Is
that's
it
a
like
very
similar-ish?
yeah, that's a very good way to put it. Yeah, I would say that's a very similar. That's a very good analogy. You're essentially creating some kind of copy of it so you can update your original file. Yes, that is a good concept. Right. That's in short. That's really what the DOM is. It's a programming interface that we're going to manipulate to update our actual document. It's an exact replica of our HTML file, right? And the way that it looks underneath the hood is something very similar to this. It makes a tree, right? It starts with your window, your browser. It creates your copy using the document, the HTML document, and then it branches out everything that's within that document and makes a replica, right? When you add things to the DOM's going to update the document that it made a copy from. Does that make sense? Now, Jason asked a question earlier of how we link our script. Now, there's two ways to do it. One way is better than the other, personally, I think, but both of them will achieve a very similar result. And that is via the script tag, right? Unlike the style sheet that use a link tag, you're going to attach a new tag called script. And this script is going to take two attributes. One is going to be the type, and the other is going to be the source, right? The type, you're just specifying very similar to how we did it in the link tag that we specified with the style sheet. But here in the script tag, we're going to specify that it's going to be written in JavaScript, right? That you can kind of really have an idea that you could probably add other types of scripts here, but we're specifically working with JavaScript. And then you're going to specify very similar to how you did the link tag, the location of this file, right? But instead of using the href, you're going to use the source attribute, right? So they differ in that sense, that they're in a different tag and they use a different attributes, but they're very similar. They're just different naming conventions. Now, there's two ways of adding your script tag. One way, which is the least preferred, honestly, is adding it on the very bottom of your body tag, right? This will connect your script tag. The way that we're going to be doing it, and the way that I recommend it, is by adding it on your head. And the reason for that is when you load up your application is going to be read from top to bottom, right? So what do you think is going to happen when you load up your script tag at the very bottom and it hasn't loaded up yet? Let's say it's loaded up all this, right? You can visually see it on your screen, but it has yet to load the script tag. Well,
you're gonna start interacting with the page before it actually loads, and then it's gonna throw you off, like those annoying websites that you go to where it halfway loads, you start clicking and then it moves.
That's a perfect example. Absolutely, right? So highly recommend it. You want to add the script tag at the very top. And additionally, you want to add another variable that says async, right? Which stands for asynchronous. All right, what that's going to let your browser do is going to make sure that before it loads everything else, it's going to load up the script, right? So by the time you start seeing everything, you already have that functionality, right? So to avoid that issue that Tim just brought up, you want to make sure that your script tag is within your head. Both ways will essentially still work, but this way is a little bit more efficient. Make sense? Also notice that the script tag is not a self-closing tag, right? It requires an opening and a closing tag. All right, we're going to talk about actually doing this in real time. So we're now in lesson 4. I want you to open up background colors. You're gonna need, you don't need the CSS right now. We should just need the HTML and the app.js. Now this is already formatted for you. Let me go ahead and open it on live server and see what it looks like. Right. This HTML, it has an H1, which is the title here of background color changer, and then it has an unordered list with 3 different list items that have the tags of turn red, turn blue, and turn purple. Notice that they have IDs already set to them. Turn red, turn blue, and turn purple is the ID. I believe it's being, oh, there's nothing to CSS. Okay. There's nothing to CSS yet, but that's going to come later. And here is our JavaScript file, right? It's already done for you. In the HTML document, you already have the script tag attached to it. You see it's in the head. It has the async attribute, the type of script it is, and then the name of the script. And here is the script and the syntax. And let's talk about what it is saying. And I believe this is also in the slides. Let's dissect this code, right? We have a couple commands. And the first command you see here is document.querySelector. Who can take a wild guess what the document is? What is this referring to?
Your HTML
Close.
page.
Not specifically HTML, but what else?
The DOM.
The DOM, right? To access the DOM, we use the document method, right? We use document to call the DOM, and the DOM has a couple of built-in methods that come with it, right? If you guys are familiar with with Python or honestly even JavaScript, there's some methods that already come built in with these languages, right? Like the methods to uppercase, right? The length method, and they do some functionality for you and they return something, right? You didn't create these methods, they already came pre-built. Very similar to JavaScript and Python, the DOM already has some pre-built methods that you have to learn to utilize it. Now, I'm going to give you a quick disclaimer. This is not exactly how you're going to do it in the cohort. And now you might be asking yourself, well, Roger, why are you teaching us this? Well, because this is how you would do it if you weren't using a framework, right? Frameworks that are going to be taught to you are React and Django. And what these frameworks are, they're essentially just some third-party applications that we utilize to make coding easier, right? To avoid doing all this. But we teach this as well, so you have an idea of how the frameworks are working, so it makes it easier to understand it. Because when you get to React, you're going to realize how very complex it is. But under the hood, this is what it's doing. So we teach this to show you how to do it normally without a framework. And then when you get to the cohort, you're going to realize that the framework is going to do a lot of this for you. And you're going to use other methods that are going to be doing this under the hood. All right, so I'm giving that quick disclaimer. But if you didn't have a framework and you had nothing but raw JavaScript, this is the way that is done. There are still pages. Many people still do it this way that don't use frameworks. Big companies use frameworks like React or Angular to make websites a lot faster, right? You could use both ways. One has a different reason for a specific purpose, and that is for rapid development. But these frameworks are essentially doing this exact same thing, just in an easier way to understand. But we're still going to learn this way so you guys understand how it works and how we use JavaScript to achieve this. Because React, and you'll realize it when you get into the cohort, React uses HTML and JavaScript in the same file, right? It's almost a combination of both languages. It's called JSX, right? And that's a little hard to understand, but it's two languages combined together. So it's going to use the same syntax for both HTML and JavaScript on the same file. And that can be very difficult to really comprehend when you first start learning coding, which is why it's very important that we understand how we do it with HTML and JavaScript separate first. So when you see it in React, it makes a little bit more sense, right? Because JSX is not a real language. It's just the language that the framework uses, and it can be very confusing. So right now, the way we were doing it, the HTML is in its own page, and this JavaScript is in a separate page. React has both of those languages together, mixed in syntax in the same lines, and it can get very confusing. I'm sure you kind of saw all that mumbo jumbo when I opened up my personal project. But here, we're accessing the DOM, and the DOM has a couple methods. And if you want to learn more about the methods, once again, you can look up at W3 Schools. You can go to the HTML DOM, and HTML DOM is going to have that for you. Right, and it has a bunch of different methods of manipulating the DOM, but we're only going to use a handful to give you a good idea of how this works. You're still going to do this exact same lesson a little bit more in depth in the actual cohort, but it's not what's going to be used for your personal project. So it's still good to see it now because you're still going to have to see it again. So if you want to know more about the methods, you can come here. You can check out the different elements. And we're going to resort back to this to show you what these methods are doing as we go to the lesson. Now, back to this. This DOM has a method called query selector. What do you think this means? Just by the name of this method, query selector.
Is it, I mean, I'm just going based off of the what's in the parentheses, but like looking for a specific match of letters or whatever the case is that you input.
Yeah, what is this right here? The text in here. You're in the right ballpark here, Chase.
Like the class.
If it was
ID,
it's the ID, right? It's the IDs, right? If it was a dot, it'd be the class, but you were on the right track. It's trying to grab something with this ID, right? So this line is grabbing a selector, as you guys already know, is your element, very similar to the syntax of CSS, right? The selector. And we're grabbing a selector that has the ID of called turn red. And then after we grab that, we append this other method that comes with it. And this method is called add event listener. And reading this, what do you think this is doing?
Probably just looking for if like somebody clicks on it or there's like a thing to slide or something like that.
Absolutely. You're right on the money. add event listener, it adds the ability for this specific element that has the ID turned red to be able to listen to the event of a click, right? That's an actual event that's happening here. And it takes 2 arguments. This method here takes 2 arguments. The first argument is the event you want to listen to. And the second argument, can you take a wild guess on what this argument is?
Function.
Yeah, it'll just run the function.
It's a function, right? It's taking in the function that it wants to run the moment that we click on that element. And then the functions are being defined here at the bottom. We have 3 different functions, but they're essentially the same function, but the outcome is a little bit different, right? Let's look at turn red function. The function turn red, once again, it grabs a document. It's going to look for a selector called body, right? It's grabbing a specific element, the body element, the body tag. And then it uses the dot style method. So it's going to access the styling of this element. And then it's going to style the background color to red, right? And the other functions are doing the exact same thing, but for a different color, right? Does everyone understand so far what this is showing before I move on to the actual code?
Yes.
Okay. That is compliant from the rest of you guys. Let's go ahead and move forward. The instructor example is the background color changer that I already had pulled up. Let's go ahead and kind of put these here so we can see them side by side. Let's do it like this. All right. And then we should be coming to open up with live server. Did I not have it with live server? There we go. So as of right now, when I click these, if you see, they're changing color, right? We don't have any CSS, guys. The CSS file is absolutely empty. But the JavaScript is changing the CSS manually through the code, right? Because of these functions. These functions are grabbing the body tag in my HTML, right? The entire body, not the individual list item, but the entire body. And then it's grabbing the style attribute from that element. It's changing the background color to red when I click on the list item with the ID of turn red. When I click the turn blue, it does the same thing for blue. And we see the same thing for purple.
Can you be more specific within the list item, or can you only select the list item? And what I mean by that is, instead of the text in that list item says turn red, could you limit it to just the red, just the blue, just the purple?
Are you talking about the text itself?
The item within the list, the text within the list item. Can you narrow it down?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you're saying, so when I press the turn on this text, it doesn't just do that, right? You're talking about specifically just the word red, blue, and purple?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely, right? I could wrap this in something like a p tag, put red in here, and then instead of adding the ID into this list item, I'll give the ID to this p tag here, where it's ID equal to turn red. Now it looks a little weird because of the fact that there's 2 different elements. I would have to do some CSS in here, but when I click the turn red and not the turn, it won't change. It's looking for me to click on the text. It looks a little weird because there's 2 elements here nested within each other, right? I would have to kind of do some CSS formatting to make it look right. But yes, you can add an ID to any element and grab that specific element. It does not matter what it is. Does that answer your question, Tim?
100%. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any questions on how this is working? Notice it's not changing anything to my HTML. It's not adding anything to my CSS. The CSS is still blank. right? The DOM is doing all this for me, thanks to the script of the JavaScript. Before I move on, do I have any questions?
No, I mean, it makes sense. Like the way you explain it, it makes sense. Now, if you asked me to code it myself, I probably would mess up, but it makes sense the way you're explaining it.
That's perfect because I'm about to ask you to code it yourself. Here we have background colors.html. The goal of this assignment for you guys is to try to achieve this exact same outcome, right? You're still going to be using the background colors, the one that's already pre-formatted for you. So in reality, you don't really have to code anything too much. You're just going to have to kind of reformat this code with everything that you have learned so far to reach this exact outcome. So more than likely, you're gonna have to add some other list items, and then these list items should have their own functions. I want you to use some CSS to format them into some blocks like this. Add a border. You can see the border is blue. We don't have the image, so don't worry about the image. Right? It should only have everything else except the image. The header should be color changer, and the background should match the actual color that's described in this div, right? I also challenge you guys to not copy and paste code, right? Do not do this. Why? Because you're not gonna learn anything like that. Granted, it's given to you already, but I recommend that you put in that muscle memory in your fingers. Try to not look directly at this code every single time. Try to come down here and say function, create a new function, turn green function, right? Use this as reference, but don't just copy the code. Kind of go through the motions of actually typing it out yourself. It's already pre-formatted for you because I know this is the first time we're seeing it. But come down here, add some extra functions, add some list items, get some divs going, add some CSS, and try to replicate the image that's within our slideshow. And I'm gonna leave this up as well while you guys work, so you guys can see how it should be looking like. Sound good? All right. Time is 8:27. We're gonna take until 8:50. We'll come back. We'll get one demo, and then we're gonna call it a night. Sound good? All right. I'll see you guys then. Oh, let me continue sharing. My bad. All right. Let's see who wants to volunteer and see their progress or show their progress. I'm sorry.
I mean, I can do it.
Let's see you, Chase.
Okay. Let me share screen. Okay. So this is the web page. It's green, yellow. So I did struggle with the random. I was like kind of googling a little bit how to choose like random color in JavaScript, and it was just unless there's a way I don't know, it didn't seem like I had enough time to like really implement that into the code. But this will do. Add that. Let me get rid of that. So here I just added the IDs of turn green, turn yellow, turn random, turn orange, along with the things. And obviously I didn't quite get into being able to put them in like boxes yet. That was kind of going to be my next step in that CSS file, was to square them away and whatnot. But there's that. And then in here I did, so I did what you said, try not to look at this stuff, but as I typed, I tried to remember what each thing meant and what it was doing. So obviously go to this document, look for this specific tag, basically. Then it looks, if that tag is found, it adds the event lister when they click on it, and it runs the specified function. So here, obviously, same thing as other stuff. I was like, okay, create a function, turn green function with no parameters or anything. And then going to document, query selector, and then it would go body, style, background color, green. Here I just put white just so the code was actually run on this. But that's where I ran into problems, was getting a random color to actually generate. I don't know if anybody else figured it out, but I wasn't able to.
Okay.
You got a lot further than I did. I was still screwing the CSS. I didn't even touch the JavaScript.
Yeah, I had thought about I started because if I open up the CSS file, I had started it and I just figured to do the JavaScript first. Like I was gonna do the JavaScript first and then do the CSS. That's just personally how I did it. And then my next step after getting all that was I was gonna actually block them off, create it like to look like the actual like wherever I put it at, I don't quite remember. Yeah, I think I closed on accident. But that was like how I did it. Obviously it's not in the boxes like I said, but that's kind of how I went.
You could have created a function like we did in the what was it the course before this one, where you used a math.random to determine a minimum of 1 and a maximum of however many colors you have, and then assign variables to create the random color.
That makes sense. I did see on my quick search that people were using the math.random, but I had kind of looked at it a little too late where I only had about 2 minutes left. But that makes sense. Yeah, I appreciate that tip. That for like the FF code or whatever. That makes a lot of sense actually.
Here's a function I found real quickly on how to use random. So JavaScript does not have a native built-in random module like Python does, unfortunately. I mean, it does, but the random module in JavaScript returns a number between 0 and 1, and it tends to be a decimal point, right? So you might get like 0.305 or something weird like that, right? So there's like some math that you have to do that I'm not very confident in. So that itself is a quick Google search here. What I share in the Zoom channel chat is a quick one I found. Maybe you try implementing that. And then depending on the number you get, exactly like you said, you might want to use like generate some kind of code with the random module that specifies to a specific number to get the RGB of these colors of red, blue, orange, green, yellow, and white. And then go through the process of creating a function to set that color that you receive from this function as the value for the style. Don't forget, this is just basic JavaScript, right? So I know we're using some methods here that are a little foreign, like document.query, like brand new to us. But this is still JavaScript, so treat it as such. You can still create functions, for loops, while loops, just set variables. It'll all be instantiated here, and then you can use these variables other places. It's still JavaScript. We're just adding some additional functionality that's coming from the DOM. That is it. Still just JavaScript. So everything that you know about JavaScript, use that to your advantage. If you don't know JavaScript, it might be a little foreign to you right now, but as you mess around with it, it's very similar to Python, just some different syntax. Definitely check out the intro to coding if you're still new to JavaScript. I think the entirety of intro to coding is in JavaScript. If you want to know Python, we have the Got Application program that will teach you Python, and we're going to do a little bit of Python in here as well. Not as in depth as the Got Application, but enough to kind of get us through. The Foundation of Programming teaches Python with the assumption that you know JavaScript. So the curriculum for Python in our course is like, hey, this is how we do it in JavaScript, but this is how you do it in Python, right? And then showing you the differences. So it's under the assumption that you know JavaScript. So if you want to know some more Python, definitely check out the Got Application program or any other resource that you think might be helpful. But that's going to conclude today's class. This is just the start, the tip of the iceberg of JavaScript that we're going to be doing here. To give you an example or a kind of idea of the other stuff we're going to be doing, tomorrow we're going to be getting this bad calculator and making it into a good calculator, right? And we'll talk about how bad this is. There's only so much functionality here, which as you can see, this is not a good calculator. So the example will be turning this to a good calculator. The outcome should be this by the end of it. So it's going to be a lot of individual work tomorrow and me kind of just jumping around breakout rooms and seeing how I can help you. Then we're going to have another assignment to use, other types of elements to manipulate, like stuff like this, like day of the week, And then next week, we're going to start APIs because we might start it tomorrow, but honestly, I really want to take some time to really knock out bad calculator and the day of the week assignment, so we can really understand it. And then APIs is using other applications, just so we can get a quick sneak peek. The API we're probably gonna be using is like, let me see, the Poke API. So this might seem a little foreign to you guys right now, and that's okay. But we're gonna be using a website to grab data from somewhere else to use on our application. For example, like we'll look for a Pokemon. This is the default is Ditto, but we can look for Pikachu, right? And it's going to return to us a JSON, and we're going to go to the JSON data, look for sprites, grab the URL for the picture for Pikachu, and display on our application. So we're going to be talking to other websites and stuff, using JavaScript to talk to these other applications, and then adding it into our image. And this is going to be a core concept that you guys are going to need to know for the actual program, whether it's DevOps, whether it's immersive program, or even a weekend. You're going to need to use APIs. So we're building up to this, right? So it's going to get a little bit more complex. The foundation of programming is structured in a way where I don't just hold your hand through everything. We kind of talk through the concepts. Here's the assignment. Give it a try, and let's talk through it, right? So I know Chase earlier, like I probably wouldn't be able to do this on my own, but you guys are more than capable. The learning part of programming is you kind of have to go through the headache and realize I don't know how to do this exactly. Let me do a quick search, and then you find somewhere in the documentation. You're going to encounter that a lot of your time as a developer is you looking through documentation. So if you hated going through field manuals in the military, that's not over. Because how do you think that we write our curriculum, right? When we create our curriculum, we had to scour through the documentation, find the important parts, and then create something for you guys to learn it. And that's how all these courses are set up. But and once again, to reiterate, the reason why we're doing this, you're still going to learn this in the immersive program. They're going to touch up on this, and they're going to elaborate more on this. This is not like completely irrelevant. They're going to teach you this to start, and then they're going to teach you React, right? Because React uses something very complex like JSX, as I mentioned to you guys. And just to show you what I mean, let me open up my music discovery app and show you the JSX. It's literally JavaScript and HTML combined together. And it's not native JavaScript, right? For example, we're creating a function here. This is very simple. We're creating a function in the same file that we're creating. We have HTML and whatnot. Let's see if we can find a much better one, a much better example. I think components would probably do it for you. Let's see, where's one where I have JavaScript embedded into it? Here we go. We have some HTML, we have functions, we have it all here. This is a component being embedded here. Notice this is a tag, right? This is a tag that I created. You're gonna be creating tags using HTML and JavaScript. And the same one, you're gonna be having JavaScript logic. And this can be very intimidating when you first see it. You're like, how are you combining JavaScript to create HTML elements? That's really weird, right? So it's important because although React does a lot of the heavy work, to understand all this, you need to understand this, right? Of how the DOM is working. So this is a very important part of it, and why it's taught here in the foundation of programming, because it's going to tie it and build off into React when you guys get into your cohorts. The React is going to do something very similar to this, just in a different way. But everything here is still very, very relevant. and very important to pay attention to. And I think tomorrow, after the bad calculator, you're really gonna understand how JavaScript works with HTML. This is a really good assignment that's really gonna tie everything together. This assignment will probably take. I'm probably gonna give you an hour for this tomorrow because it's pretty heavy. I've yet to see anyone finish this calculator assignment, so I challenge you guys to see if you guys can get it. But that's gonna conclude today's class. Let me go ahead and stop the recording.